All right. Well, how is everybody's week going? I feel like, did I hear a horrible? Oh, I hope not. If it is, let's talk. um, but when I was preparing to come up here and talk to you about John 5, which is what I get to talk to you guys about today, um, this week has been a hard week, but not for myself. Like, people around me are struggling, and I have struggles too, and my family has struggles, and it made me think back to myself and when I've been walking through really, really, really hard times. Where did I turn? How did I see my God in those moments when I was struggling? And when I was reading through John 5, I actually woke up early this morning and God put on my heart, revisit what you have planned for your sermon. We're going to make a couple of tweaks because this message is more personal, I think, than I was making it. And if you guys, who has been here for this John series and remembers John 2, a couple weeks ago, second week, right? We talked about the jars and the healing. We're going to talk a little bit deeper about that healing today and where we are and aren't allowing ourselves to be healed. So to start us off, we're going to jump right in and read John 5:1. There should be a slide for it, I think. Hopefully. There we go. All right. So sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. So we're going to just sit there for 1 second. Let's get our mind in the context, okay? Take yourself back to biblical times. We're not here in the present. We're going to journey to the past, just hump in my time machine here. And we're going to put ourselves in the context of that moment. It wasn't like, who's been to a festival of any kind? We've got like the Vinox Fest, which is super fun, and by Wabick. We've got the Land of the Loon Festival. And those festivals are filled with fun. They're filled with food. They're filled with vendor booths, fun things for you to do with the kids and the family. But there was festivals like that when Jesus lived. They were a little different because these are Jewish festivals we're talking about. So they were held in the synagogue and around those areas close to that location. And they were filled with all kinds of fun things. And Jesus was going to those festivals. There were 7 total Jewish festivals that were held throughout the whole year. And we can read about them more in Leviticus 23, where it gives us kind of that list. There's Passover, the Festival of Unleavened Bread, First Fruits, Pentecost, Trumpets, Day of Atonement, and Tabernacles. And these festivals were significant because their whole purpose for all 7 festivals was to celebrate God's guidance and to foreshadow Jesus. So now let's think about that for a second. These festivals that Jesus is going to are held for the purpose of celebrating God's active guidance and foreshadowing the coming of Jesus. And Jesus is here and he's going to this festival. Just that one really hit me like, oh, wow. Hold on a minute. And he shows up there to this festival, okay? And he is the Messiah, okay? And this festival is foreshadowing the coming of the Messiah, and in walks the Messiah. And these feasts also provided an opportunity for Jesus, while he was here, to reveal his identity and his mission. So these festivals are all about him, and he's coming to reveal, hey, I'm here, hello. Thank you for the festival. We're going to talk. Here, I'm here. But it didn't really, if I thought about this right now, we're here to talk about Jesus and celebrate, but a man walks in the door and says he's Jesus. How are we going to respond? Right? So we got to really put ourselves back in their seat of the people who were around this festival when Jesus walked in the door. So in John 5, Jesus was specifically attending the Feast of Tabernacles. It is a 7-day celebration beginning on the Sabbath that honored the Israelites' exodus from Egypt. And it was held in the fall at the Temple of Jerusalem. So that's the specific festival we're talking about here in John 5. We're going to read John 5, 2 through 4 now and get a little bit deeper into the text. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a great pool, which in America is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. So let's picture this for a minute. Jesus walks into this festival, and it's near the sheep gate in Jerusalem. And it's got 5 colonnades, and it's under a large number, or under this set of colonnades, there's a large number of sick people gathering by this pool of Bethesda, laying on the ground, leaning on poles. Some of them can't walk, so they're just kind of sitting, encircling this pool. Some of the people were blind, some were lame, some were paralyzed, and they were waiting for something. It wasn't Jesus they were waiting for. They were waiting for something that was pretty common at this pool at the time. If anybody knows what it is, get that in your mind and picture that moment, okay? They're waiting for the pool to stir. Because it was said, if we read on, it should be on the next slide here. Here, a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. Or the next one. One who was there had been an invalid for over 30 years. And when Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" We're going to pause there for a minute. So, at certain times, this pool was stirred and said to be stirred by an angel of the Lord. So let's picture all of these sick people around the pool, and they're waiting. Some of them are waiting to hear it because they can't see it. Some of them are waiting to see it. And when that pool stirs, have you guys ever been to like maybe the opening of a movie, or maybe you've been to a fancy club or a fancy restaurant and you're waiting in a line, and then all of a sudden the time turns 6 o'clock or whatever time you've been waiting for, and everybody gets up and they all want to rush in. And it's like a herd of cattle trying to get in this small little door to this club or this restaurant or this movie theater. That's kind of what this was like, okay? So picture, it was kind of, they're on the ground, and the pool goes down like this, and there's a set of stairs that go down to the pool into the water. So people are waiting to get down that little set of stairs and into the pool right at the moment it stirred, because the first one who got in was said to be healed. They're waiting for the cleansing of their sins to be healed. Now remember, back then, if you had a condition like you were paralyzed, we've read about this in some of Jesus' other miracles, right? If you were paralyzed, or you had a condition where you were blind or deaf or whatever it was, the culture looked at that as that person is diseased because of their sin. This was something they caused to happen to them. They are diseased now. We don't want to be around that because we don't want their sin to rub off on us. I imagine a bunch of religious leaders and upstanding members of society standing on the outskirts with all of these hurt and sick people laying and standing around the pool in anticipation, waiting for the pool to stir, and Jesus walks on up to them. Can you imagine what those other people who were on the outskirts did? What their reaction was when they saw Jesus approach the pool? Some of them might have known who Jesus was by now. They might have seen him speak at other places. They might have heard about him. Some may not have known who he was at all. But they all knew that if you were an upstanding person, you didn't go near that pool or those people. And here Jesus strolls right on up. I'm seeing in my head a bunch of people going, oh, right? Ew, don't talk to him now. He's diseased. What is he thinking? Maybe other people are thinking, okay, we got to go tell him. We got to go tell him that this is not a place you'd be. Somebody go tell him. I don't want to go tell him. You go tell him. Can you imagine what they were hearing and talking about in those outskirts, watching Jesus walk up to the pool? It really makes life real for me when I read these stories, because I've been in situations like that, and you probably have too. So let's talk about the pool's location for a moment, because it adds meaning to this. The pool was located just outside the city walls to the north of the temple in Jerusalem. And it was near the sheep gate, which was the entrance for sacrificing lambs. We've heard a lot about this, right? It was a pretty significant thing back in Jesus' time and in the Old Testament of sacrificing a lamb. This was something that you would do to atone for sins. The spilling of the lamb's blood would pay for whatever sins you were coming to confess that day. It was a type of cleansing. The pool was a type of cleansing. We're seeing all of these different types of cleansing rituals for the culture at the time, right around this area of this festival. So we can hear about the lamb's blood being spilled very significantly in the story when the shadow of death is coming. And the Israelites, they would take the blood of the perfect lamb and they would spread it on their doorframe so that the angel of death would pass by. Right? There's a lot of significance in the protection and the cleansing of this lamb's blood. The pool was also divided into two different halves. We had the southern and the northern side of the pool. The southern pool had 3 flights of steps that led down into the water, while the northern pool was used for collecting and decanting water. When I was reading this, my mind just kept going back to John 2, when he's talking about those jars that were for cleansing at the wedding. If any of you have ever experienced a Catholic ceremony, holy water is something that is very precious. You don't grab it and drink it or play with it. I'm imagining this half of the pool is probably like that too. So we got one half of the pool. This is for cleansing for the rich people, or the people who claim to be Catholic. They can fill up a jar. That cleansing's for them. But for all of you other people who are lame and sick, you can go to the other half of the pool. We're going to segregate here. That part of the pool is for you. Don't go to the wrong side, right? Or you'll be cast out of society. Go to the right side that you need to go to. So we've got 2 different sides of cleansing. And the cleansing is divided for different types of people. So now we have Jesus approaching this man with all of these different pieces of the puzzle for cleansing scattered through this area. And he's walking up to the place that most people avoided. So we're going to read John 5:8-16. So let's move forward a couple. There it is. So Jesus told him, he walks up to this man, okay? He's seen this man. He knows this man has been sick for 38 years. Can you imagine think of what you're walking through right now, whatever that hardship is. Okay, there's lots of different hardships in this room. We all walk through them. They might not look the same as the person sitting next to you, but we all have hardships. So picture that thing that you're struggling with right now, and now picture yourself struggling with it for 38 years. It's kept you from doing the things you want. Maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's depression, maybe it's a job that you don't like and you don't feel treated well at, maybe it's finances, maybe it's substance use, hanging out with the wrong crowd, whatever it is, we all have struggles. Now picture doing that for 38 years. That's a lot. I don't know about you, but if I get sick and I'm sick for more than 3 days, I'm I can't do this anymore. I'm done. Jesus, take me. I don't want to be sick no more. But yet 38 years this man has suffered. Jesus walks up to him. He's waiting for that pool to stir. And he says, stand up, pick up your mat, and walk. So imagine with whatever you're struggling with right now, Jesus walks up to you, or this guy, he didn't even know it was Jesus. This guy walks up to you, and he says, Melissa, take your mat and stand up and walk. Walk away from your sins. Right? He looks you in the face and tells you to pick up your mat and walk. The Bible doesn't say this, but I can imagine it wasn't like, oh, okay, Jesus, here we go. He was probably like, what now? This passage tells us that he wasn't there at the pool actually thinking he was going to get healed. This man was laying there. He was lame. He couldn't move for himself. And he straight up told Jesus, I want to be healed, but I can't right now. I'm going to go back up to John 5:5-7. I know I'm bouncing around, but I've got reason. Bear with me. So Jesus says, when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been already sick for a very long time, he asked him, do you want to get well? If Jesus asked you right now, do you want to get well, what would you say? He didn't exactly say yes, though. Here's what he said. He said, sir, I don't have anyone to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. While I'm trying to get there, someone else steps down ahead of me. I heard a lot of people say, well, yeah, I would say yeah. If Jesus asked me if I wanted to get healed right now, I would say yes. But we're seeing this example here where this man didn't say yes and he didn't say no, but he kind of threw out an excuse or a reason why he couldn't get healed. Have you ever done that? I know I have. Jesus is right there saying, do you want to be healed? We all think we're going to say yes. But when it comes down to that moment, when we are in the pit of hurting, when we are in the pit of discomfort, of our struggles, of the darkness in our lives, we don't feel the hope. We don't let ourselves feel the hope that Jesus is standing right in front of us asking if we want to be healed. Instead, we say, well, Jesus, you don't know what it's like, man. I got this other person that is being so mean to me. I've got this job that just I can't advance in. You don't understand what it's like. I can't pay my mortgage. My job doesn't pay me enough money. Whatever your struggle is, we're telling Jesus, we're avoiding the question. We're not going to say yes or no. We're going to say, yeah, this is what's going on. This is what I'm focusing on. This man here was not focusing that there was someone in front of him who was God in the flesh, here to change things and write things new. He doesn't even let himself see that. Instead, he focuses back on his struggles. I have done this time and time again in my own life, and it has never been profitable. It has never gotten me through what I was going through. Let's see what happens next, because it is interesting. We're going to read John 5 through right now, all the way through. He tells Jesus, I can't get there. I can't get healed. And Jesus says, stand up, pick up your mat, and walk. We might be saying, Jesus, you don't get it. I got all this stuff. And Jesus goes, no, just stand up, pick up your mat, and walk. The man immediately became well. I've read a few different versions of this when preparing, and none of them repeated the word immediately. And that stuck out to me. It says, the man immediately became well. He probably felt it, I would assume, if he had been achy and, stiff. He probably felt his joints loosen and felt less achy and better. And it does say he picked up in his mat and started walking, but it doesn't repeat the word immediately. So immediately he became healed. Not immediately he also picked up his mat and began to walk. I'm assuming, because I know how I am, that when this man became healed, he still had doubt. Like who? He didn't even know this was Jesus, right? So he's like, who is this guy telling me I'm healed? Well, I kind of feel better. Jesus might have been sitting there in a being with moment and being like, I'm just going to wait. I know people are looking at us funny. I know people are disgusted I'm over here, but I'm not looking at that. I'm looking at you, and I'm just going to wait for you to be ready to move. And we know eventually he does. We don't know how long it took, but we know he does. He picks up his mat, and he starts walking. Now, that day was a Sabbath. Some of you might have grown up in a home that really honored the Sabbath. Other of you might be like, I've heard it here, but I don't really know about the Sabbath. The Sabbath was a holy day. It was considered a day to be left alone of any work. You were to rest, and that was it. And if anything got in the way of your rest, it was unholy. Just to speak a little bit on that. So the Jewish leaders saw this man picking up his mat, which was work. It was work to pick up your mat and walk. And they looked at him with disgust again. There's more of that disgust, right? He's working on the Sabbath. He's sinful. Look at that. It was not lawful in the Sabbath for you to carry your mat. They told him, hey, you, it is not lawful for you to carry your mat on the Sabbath. But he answered them, the man who made me well told me, pick up your mat and walk. So he's like, yeah, well, he told me to. He told me to. Right? Pointing the finger, who does that? It's really hard to take things on yourself and be accountable. He could have said, yeah, but I'm healed. And I'm going to listen to the guy who told me. But instead he points, well, he told me to. Okay? They asked him, who is this man who told you pick up your mat and walk? But the one who had been healed did not know who it was, because Jesus had slipped away from the crowd in that place. Jesus did a miracle, and then he walked away to do other things in the crowd. And this guy proves right here, he didn't know that it was Jesus who healed him. He didn't know it was the Messiah, the whole reason they were there at this festival in the first place. He didn't realize that. But later on, Jesus found him in the temple and told him, look, you have become well. Stop sinning or something worse may happen to you. The man went off and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who had made him well. So the Jewish leaders began persecuting Jesus because he kept doing such things on the Sabbath. There is a lot here to unpack. So we have this gentleman who was already a cast out of society. He was dirty, he was unclean, it was his fault he was that way because of his sins. And then this man comes to him and tells him, get up and walk. He feels healed. Eventually, he picks up his mat, which was illegal on the Sabbath, and begins walking around with it in front of people. A miracle just happened, but they're not focusing on the fact that they knew this man had been paralyzed. That's not even mentioned in here. They look way past that. Oh, a miracle? Who cares about the miracle? You're sinning on the Sabbath. So many times God is moving in our lives. He is doing miracles for us actively, even things we've asked him for. Or maybe he's doing it in the lives of people we know, but because it's not us, we go back to, oh, woe is me, right? We go back to, I'm going to focus on my strife and my struggles. I'm not going to focus on the miracle in front of me. Maybe God has done huge things in your life. You've made leaps and bounds to where you were 5 years ago. But because you're still going through struggles today, which, let me break it to you, you always are going to while you're here on earth. There's not going to be a time when you're not going to struggle. But because you're still struggling, you completely forget about the things that God has done for you already. And you focus on, God, I'm in a bad place. I really relate with those religious leaders, and not proudly. But when you work with people, some of you might work in human services. Sometimes you'll see somebody make big progress, and then they fall 20 steps back. And you're like, man, I just can't do this anymore. I need to wash my hands of helping these people. But this next line is really eye-opening. So he tells him it was Jesus who healed him, and later on Jesus finds him in the temple and told him, look, you have become well. Stop sinning or something worse might happen to you. I feel like that is not just God's words for that man, but that is words for us. Some of you come to church and you sit here and you talk about the good things in your life or the good things you're doing in life, but you don't tell anyone in fellowship here in God's house what you're struggling with. You're ashamed. You're too proud. You don't want them to know that you're struggling with addiction. You don't want them to know that you're struggling with finances. You don't want them to know that you're going through depression. Oh, how would the people at church look if they knew that I struggled so much? That one bugs me. You guys know that God calls us into fellowship to be imperfect with each other and open? God calls us here because he loves us, and he says, hey, I want you to share this so that you can be healed. I want you to let go and not try to control, not try to walk through alone. I want you to come into fellowship and share with each other. Don't be proud. Don't be worried about what others are thinking about you, because the only one who matters in the end is what God thinks. Who are we to say, oh, that person might be judging me. God's telling me to raise my hand during worship. I really want to, but no, because they're going to laugh at me. They're going to see it. Even if they don't say it, I know they're thinking it. But God says, why are you worried about that? Even if that was true, what would it really do to you? And the religious leaders of that time were so focused on the customs and the practices that they had created. Maybe some of you guys have church hurt because you've been to some churches before who might have looked down on you for a circumstance in your life. Maybe you did share with them some of what you consider the blackness in your life or your past or your current history to be. And they've shunned you or they haven't responded well. That happens. I'm sorry that happened to you, but it does happen. And it's probably happened to more of us than you realize. But if we open up and talk about it, we can heal. And that's just what these religious leaders were doing. These Jewish leaders were there. Remember, they were there right now at this festival for the point of talking about the coming of Christ. And there Christ was in their midst doing a miracle, and they refused to see it. Sometimes we refuse to let ourselves see. So, if we look to John 5:17 and 18, here's Jesus' answer to those religious leaders when they began persecuting him. They went up to him and they're like, hey, Jesus, no. You can't do that. It's the Sabbath. You can't be doing miracles on the Sabbath. That's against God. For those of you who know Jesus, which is everybody in this room, you know he is God. So they're telling God he's doing things against God. Do we ever do that? I'm going to be real with you and say, I have. I'll come to God and I'll say something like, God, I'm really struggling with this, and, this is what you say. You say I need to come in prayer, but you're not answering me. You're going against what you told me to do. It's your fault. You're not answering me. But really, I need to look at myself and say, God gave me an answer, it just wasn't what I wanted to hear. Or maybe it wasn't in the way that I thought it was going to happen, so I refuse to let myself see it. I think that's what's happening here. They're getting excited, like they want the Messiah to come. That's why they have 7 awesome, fun, festive festivals throughout the year. They're looking to this. They're thanking God for what he's gotten them through, and they're looking forward to when he comes again. But then it doesn't happen in the way they expected or planned. It doesn't fit into their idea of what God was going to do or how he was going to do it. So then they straight up told him, you're being bad. You aren't who you say you are. I'm not going to believe, even though these miracles are right in front of my face, I'm not going to soften my heart and believe that because the customs and the rituals that I have built mean more. Some of us have walls we need to let God take down. Often we get stuck in our own ways or the ways of the world, much in the same way those religious leaders were stuck. I remember when I was a teenager, I believed in God. I got saved when I was very little. Like 3, 4 years old, I'm raising my hands and praising Jesus. But then I turned into a teenager, and the ways of the world and the customs of the world and the things that other kids my age were doing became my false idol, and I started looking to that instead of looking to the God I knew. It's really difficult when you are surrounded by people who live a different way than you do. A lot of times they believe a different thing than you believe. And even though God has done miraculous things in our lives, we still look at that and we say, well, I'm just going to go over here and do this because that seems to be what's right because that's what everyone else is doing. And that's all the more thought we give it. We don't look behind why that is. We just do. I got in with crowds that didn't do things that I knew Jesus wanted me to do, and I would feel it in here. I would feel that it was wrong, but it looked so right. And from a surface level, it kind of felt good sometimes to go let loose, to go have some drinks, to go to a party because the cool kids were there, and I looked cool. No, but I sure thought I did. And now I can look back and see, man, I know that I could have had a huge influence on not just the lives of others, but even my own life. I would have saved myself from a lot of the things I walked through had I just focused on God instead of my circumstances. Had I focused on Jesus and who he really is and his promises and his new way, instead of focusing on the ways of the world and the culture I was living in. When Jesus came there that day, I believe it was very intentional. The Bible sets us right up into it. It was very intentional that Jesus came to that festival where there were a lot of unclean people coming to be cleansed. There were all these different ways around them to get cleansed. They could sacrifice a lamb. They could go into the pool. But Jesus came there that day, and he didn't bring a lamb and give it to the lame guy and say, hey, I'm going to carry you. We're going to go sacrifice this lamb together. It's not what he did. He didn't say, here, let me lift you into the pool. I'll run in there and I'll get you in right when it's stirred. He didn't do that either. He said, do you want to be healed? Okay, stand up and walk. Grab your mat. Let's go. Some of us here today need to do that. And I know it's scary, and I know it's hard. But when God calls us to something and we're able to step out in obedience, even with shaky knees, even with trembling hands, even with a heart that feels so heavy, 10 elephants wouldn't weigh as heavy as my heart does today. That might be some of you right now. But what God wants you to do is to stop looking at it. Stop looking at your sin. Start looking at the only one who can wash it clean. Stop carrying it yourself because, I don't know about you, but if any of you have kids and you've carried a kid for a while, they get heavy, right? Especially if you have got a baby and those baby carriers. I remember I felt so buff after the first 2 years of my life with kids. I was like, oh yeah, I'm weightlifting every time I have to bring my kid to the car, right? And then they get bigger and you're building up those muscles more. But God is not saying, hey, build up your muscles to your sin. Carry them yourself for a while and then I'll help you once you're buff. That's not what he's saying. He says, right now, don't worry or think or even let it enter your mind what the person sitting next to you is thinking or feeling. Okay? I want you guys to just close your eyes. Everybody close your eyes for a moment. And try as best as you can to clear your mind. Don't think about your current struggle or situation. Don't think about the heaviness on your heart. Don't think about anyone else. I want you to picture just light. Let yourself see Jesus as light and feel that warmth, because when he came, just keep your eyes closed for a moment. Picture this, when he came to that pool, and he came in front of those religious leaders and those other people who followed that religion, he came to say, you're doing this, you've had to do this. This was a weight you buried. But I have come because my presence is rewriting a new way. Those jars are not how you get cleansed. That pool is no longer how you get cleansed. Sacrificing those lambs is no longer how you get cleansed. Now picture that light in your mind growing brighter. He said, I am the Son of God and I am brighter. We hear that message over and over in the Bible. That Jesus is the new life, the new covenant, the new way. We are not stuck to those old ways. We are living in the new way right now. And Jesus is that way. He is stronger. He's a stronger soap than any soap you could wash with in that pool. And his blood is stronger than 1,000,000 lambs. He is the Lamb. You can open your eyes. That light that you pictured, I want you to let that light guide you right now and only focus on that. If you want to keep your eyes closed, keep them closed, but I'm going to invite the worship team to come up. We're going to do just a moment of reflection here. And I have a challenge for you. If you have something you're holding on to, if you have a heaviness and a load that you're carrying all on your own, maybe you've talked about it with others, maybe you've shared it with a few, but you're still not letting go. You're still focused on that struggle and how hard it is or how heavy it is or how big it is, how painful it is, how scary it is, how dark it is. Your focus is on the wrong place, and we're going to reset that. Envision the light of Jesus not just in front of you, but wrapping around you right now. I'm going to ask him, would the prayer team mind coming back up for this reflection? The things we walk through, even if you're thinking right now, I know there's some of you thinking, I know everyone else in here has bigger problems than I do. Yeah, I'm bothered by this, but I need to stop being so selfish. Other people can go get help. No, God is not just here for the big things. Jesus didn't just die for the big things. He died for the little things too. He died to cover every sin. Every sin. Maybe you struggle with a poor self-image. I have struggled with that a lot. And I would just think to myself, I'm not going to share that with anybody. That's not, other people are struggling with poverty and hunger and all these other things. Mine doesn't matter. Oh, that is so silly. Yes, it does. Because I don't care who you are, you matter to Jesus. And it doesn't matter how big or small what you're carrying is or feels. It matters to Jesus, and he died for that too. Maybe you struggle with anxiety or depression, and you're like, well, that's my fault. I let myself feel that way. I let myself talk to myself that way. I got myself into this job. It's my fault. I made those decisions. It's my fault. Jesus says, yeah, sometimes the things we do is because of the choices we've made. That's a reality. But he also says, I don't care. I still died for that. I don't care. I still died for that. You need to let it go now. So as we go into this last song, I invite you to make your choice. To hand anything and everything at the cross now, to be cleansed in the new way. To be cleansed by Jesus, because that is now the only way. You can't go home and take a shower and be free of it. You can't splash some holy water on your forehead and be free of it. But guys, what you can do is even easier than that. Right now in your heart, you can know it, that you want to be free and say, God, this is hard. Be honest with him, but here, wash me clean. Say yes. Jesus is asking you, do you want to be healed? Don't say, my kids are so hard to deal with. I feel like I'm a bad parent. I've let them down. Don't say that. Just say yes. Don't say, but God, I need my job because it's money. And even though I know I'm not supposed to be there and I feel you calling me somewhere else, I have to make money. Oh, no. He's saying, don't think about that. Give it to him. Let him wash it and watch what happens this week. I did this in my life, and I am standing before you, a testimony of God. That I have had things I've done wrong. I am so far from perfect. I have made so many bad choices. I have said, I gave it to God, but I didn't. And then I walked the next step and I did give it, but then I took it right back. And I know we've talked about that a lot up here. Pastor Brianna has talked about it a lot. But it is so true. We just do that. We have been taught that we have to carry our own burdens, that we just have to make it work. But as a believer in Christ, no. Jesus is the new way. Give it to him. He's got this. You let him fill you with joy. I have a joy now that even when I'm walking through struggle, I start to feel sad and then I go, whoa, Jesus. And then I all of a sudden feel this joy that I can't even explain to you guys. I've had joy when I've been throwing up in the toilet and super sick and like not wanting to be sick anymore, but I've still felt this weird joy. I've had moments where I'm like struggling with my parenting, struggling because I feel like I've let myself down or others down, and I'm starting to look at myself and talk down on myself, and then I go, wait a minute, Jesus. And instantaneously I'm filled with joy that I can't explain. I want you to have that right now so much. As we go into this next song, you choose how you respond. Sit and pray. If you feel you want to talk to God through this song, do it. If you want to come up here and kneel at the altar, I will kneel with you. You will not be alone. Because I want to share my joy with you. And that joy can't be given from me to you. But you can get it from Jesus now, and we can share it and celebrate in it together. If you have something heavy that you're like, I don't think I can lay this down, be honest, that's okay. Our prayer team is around here for you to come in fellowship and get that prayer to release. Join us in the joy. That joy can be anywhere. Sorrow, anger, regret. That joy can come in and you can be cleansed. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you. Thank you for Jesus. Thank you for the new way, the new covenant in Jesus' blood. Lord, thank you. Help us to focus right now. Thank you for the miracles you've done in our life.